What is going on, everybody? We are going to look at some AX8 tips and tricks for today, seeing as it is 2020 and the AX8 still sounds amazing. The way we're going to do this, I'm just going to go through some of the presets that I have in my AX8 and pull out some little morsels for you guys to chew on. So at the moment, I have this preset based around the USA C++, the modified Mark II C++, favored by the likes of Metallica for one. So I'll run you through the signal chain really quickly. I'm using the 2C++ obviously right here, and you can see the kind of classic Mark series style settings with the bass, middle, and treble quite low. I have the presence control all the way off on this model. I've got the overdrive all the way up, and right here I have a scene controller attached to the input drive. We'll talk about that in a second. The trick with these, of course, is balancing out the pre-EQ, the bass, middle, treble, and the graphic EQ, which is post gain. You can see I'm boosting a lot of the low frequency, pulling out some 240 and some 750, and then boosting some 2200 and 6600. In front of that, I have this FET boost set up with the drive low and the level high. This is kind of set to emulate a clon style pedal. And then I'm using this IR that I made of a Marshall cab with some vintage 30s in it. This one is up on the AX8 if you want to get it. As you can see, low cut and high cut in there. Where's the low cut? 80 hertz, high cut 8000 hertz. And then with the parametric EQ, I've also got the same settings with these blocking type EQs. So we're stacking two high and low pass filters on there. And then I'm pulling out a little bit of 3.7 and a little bit of 5K. If you haven't seen my other videos talking about how to do that, they are up on my channel. But nevertheless, this is the basic straight up rhythm guitar sound. Which is a lot of fun, really super saturated, but also really tight and percussive as well. There's a couple little tricks in the amp block that I like to bring out a bit of that tightness in the low end. One is if you go to the preamp section here, and you can set the high cut in the preamp, sorry, the low cut in the preamp. I think the default value is around 70 hertz. I like to bring it up to about 250. This is what it does if you set it low. Just kind of clears the low end mud up a little bit in there as well. And on the basic page, I've also got the fat switch on. So if you set the fat switch off, it does what it says on the tin. It makes everything sound really, really fat. Now, on these presets, I normally have 4 scenes. The second scene I like to kick in is my scene with rhythmic delay. I'll show you the delay settings in here. I'm using the Deluxe Mind Guy, and I've got it set up. If you go to the config in the AX8, you can set the configuration to be a dual delay. So I have a dotted eighth note and a quarter note delay in there. And because the dotted eighth note is a shorter delay, and I want it to have the same number of, I want the repeats to die out at the same time as the quarter note, I've compensated for that by setting the feedback lines differently. So a dotted eighth note is about 75% as long as a quarter note. So I have flipped it around and increased this one here by a ratio of 1.5. I think that's how it works. Something like that. Anyway, it's all synced up to the tap tempo, and it is lovely for those edge Alex Lifeson style delays. Very, very cool. On the third scene, I've got a phaser doing some swirly stuff on top of all of that. It sounds like this. And for that particular effect, I like setting up the phaser, with the rate really, really high there, so you get that really, really intense wobble. And then on scene 4, this is my lead scene. What we have here is the amp boost gets turned on. There's a parametric EQ, which increases the level by 2 dB, and it also bumps a little bit of the mid-range at about, what is that, 1.6K? No, it's not doing that. Where's it bumping it? At 2K in this preset. And it switches the delay over to the X setting, where I've got the stereo BBD. Love the way this sounds with the mix at 30%. And this is a cool little trick, again, if you want to get that dual delay style thing, is I have the main tempo set as a quarter note, but then the ratio is set at 75%. So one side's going to be a quarter note, the other is going to be a dotted eighth delay. And this is what you heard at the start. This is glorious. So that is my lead scene. Now let's talk about these scene controllers really quickly, because this is a great trick you can utilize to gain stage your presets. What is happening here is I've got, if you right click, I've got a modifier attached to scene 1 right here. And that is going to link up over here in the controllers section, where I've got the input drive set to the scene controller. And look at this. I can now use this scene controller on every scene as a little helper to put that drive knob wherever I want it. So on scene 1, it's at 60%. On scene 4, it's at 70%. So there's more drive on my lead scene and there's less drive on my other 2 scenes. So this is awesome if you want to get around that switching gap. I do have a separate video about scene controllers. I've got separate videos about most of this stuff, but I figured it might be nice to put it all in one preset. So I love the way that sounds. And then what I've done is I've just saved this preset to a bunch of different spots and swapped in different amps. So preset number 3 is essentially the same thing, but instead of the C++, I have the Atomica High model. You can see the settings here on the screen. Again, there's still that scene controller. I've just left this at the stock settings. I haven't touched it. And that one, to me, that's like the perfect brown sound style amp in there. All the scenes are set up the same in this one. I think number 4 is probably going to be my Rectifier preset, if I remember correctly. It is. I've done something slightly different here. Here's a cool little trick you can do. Instead of the drive block with the Recto, I have set up a tilt EQ with the frequency at 300 Hertz, big gain boost there, and then the high cut at 10K. Now this is based on the settings for the Fortin grind pedal, which were posted on the forum, and it sounds spot on. So in the AX8 3, there is an amp block preamp boost mode called Grinder based on the Fortin grind, and then this is basically the settings. You just use the level to adjust the gain. If I turn it off, you have that classic flubby Recto thing. Absolutely incredible. So copy those settings if you want to have the Fortin grind in your AX8. Let's hear some cleaner presets now. And this amp, in a similar way to the Atomica, which is like the ultimate brown sound style amp, the ultimate kind of jangly light crunch amp in here is just the AC20 at more or less the stock settings. Again, I've got those scene controllers in there controlling the input drive, but this is just a ridiculous amp. It's so nice. Again, same cab, same post-parametric EQ, just kind of tweaking the cab out a little bit, but this is so good. Now on this guitar, there are some split modes which sound like this. Very, very bright there. What I like to do is use a compressor. This is just pedal comp number 1 to really squish that. And what I would do on my guitar is just use my tone control to back that. Embarrassing myself with my lack of country chops right there. Or you can put a drive block in front of this guy. Again, the FET boost absolutely loves this amp for, you know, your kind of Brian May thing on the bridge humbucker. Probably not the most authentic Brian May tone anyway, but the vibe is there. That's what's important. On all of these presets, you've probably noticed there's a reverb block sitting in there, and I use this just for a touch of room ambience. On the AX8 there is a room section in the cabinet block, but we don't have that here. So I'm using Recording Studio C. The mix is really, really low, and I've just turned the time down to about 0.5 seconds. If you're playing on in-ears, using this little trick makes such a big difference because it takes that like directness out of it. It just makes everything sit a little bit nicer. And this works well on bass as well if you're monitoring bass on in-ears. So there's the AC20. Let's see, can we pick up any other cool tricks on one of the other amp blocks? I've got the Vibrato Lux here, and you know, just kind of bass low, or bass down a bit, mids and treble up a little bit. It's such a nice clean amp. So yeah, the Vibrato Lux, the reverb I'm using here as well is the South Church reverb. Pretty much the stock settings. I just brought the mix down a little bit. The South Church reverb has to be in my top 3 reverbs in there. And the compressor, again, I'm actually not using the pedal compressor. I'm using one of the optical types. With the comp quite high, you can see the attack and release settings there. And with this off, you get this on this guitar. So that when you run it with humbuckers, it's really, really squishy, but on those split modes, it's not so squishy. There's one other preset I really wanted to show you guys in here, and it is this, I've just called it LT Messer Gig. I had to do a rock covers gig last year, filling in for somebody, and this is what I went with. So it's actually one of the Mark IV models in here. You can see very similar to the C++ in terms of settings. The graphic EQ, I think, is, well, there you go. It's basically identical, a little bit less 80 Hertz. There is that low cut. I've got a bit higher in there. This is the Mark IV models sound amazing. Again, I think it's the same cab. It's the same cab, but you'll notice that I had to run a cab for this gig because the monitoring situation was not ideal. So I was sending to front of house through here, but I still wanted stereo delays and I wanted the trem and everything like that in there. So rather than place the cab here, I've placed it at the end of the chain, and I've used a stereo cab, and I've panned both of the cabs hard left and hard right. Same cabinet, as you can see. That way my delays can go through here and the stereo image won't get squashed. But up here, I'm sending before the cab to a solid state power amp and a cabinet via the effects loop block, and I've got a filter set up. What I noticed was my particular cab had this weird little resonance here, about 250, so I've pulled a bit of 250 out, and I set the low cut and the high cut there. It just made my cab sound better. So same kind of parametric EQ cuts here so that they can go into the cab. And there's a really cool little trick here with the formant block. We had to do Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi, so you need the talk box thing. Anyway, this is the straight up sound. It's a little bit kind of, I guess, beefier sounding and a little bit fizzier sounding in there as well, because there was a keyboard player for the gig. I needed that extra stuff to cut through the wall of sound that was going on. Now, the formant I've got running in parallel, and as you can see, the start, mid, and end are E, R, R. And the controller I've got it set to control switch number 2. Okay, this is really important. I've also got auto engage on, so that when I press my control switch, it's going to auto engage the block. Notice I've also got it after the amp block, kind of the way you would with a real talk box. But where are we? If we go to controllers, and no, not controllers, foot switches. So that's control switch number 2. I've set the control switch to be a momentary switch so that when I press it, it will turn the talk box style effect on. And when I release it, it will be off. So this is a really bad setup for this, because ideally it would be on the floor, but I've got my AX8 sitting here on my desk. So anyway, this is what happens with the momentary switch when you turn it on and off. And it works really, really well doing that. On scene 2, I've used a scene controller. I always forget about that with AX8 Edit. So on scene 2, I've used a scene controller to bring the input drive right down, and I would use my single coils here. There's also a compressor on. And as you can see, using these Mark Series amps, they're great because you can turn the drive right down and you get a nice edge of breakup thing happening along with the compressor. This is, again, set up with that optical compressor. All right, so I've got that. And what I discovered sounded amazing for this gig was just using the trem with a rate at 4 Hertz. Again, because there were a lot of songs which had no guitar in them originally, so they were piano songs. Having the trem on there just sounded really, really nice. I could sit there and turn the delay on this cleaner scene as well. Again, good old mate, stereo BBD, and just do some swells and things like that. And do some ambient style stuff there. Now, because I was using a real cab for this gig, I didn't put a reverb block in there because I wasn't monitoring through my in-ears or anything like that. I had the real cab on stage, which is always a lot of fun to feel that air moving. Alrighty, there you go. There's some stuff I have on my AX8. Oh, one more thing. I gotta remember where this is. I don't have my acoustic guitar plugged in at the moment, but I figured that's a different preset. That one's kind of fun as well. Before we go, where is this preset? Just my acoustic patch, and I use it basically every week. There we go. So my AX8 basically just lives in a gig bag now as a grab and go kind of thing. But my acoustic patch is really, really simple. I've got a parametric EQ, and it's just pulling down some of these extreme frequencies in here, which are 4K on my guitar and 8K on my guitar. With a piezo, they're really, really zingy. And there's a bit of high cut and low cut. And that sounds great. That's how I run my acoustic guitar. I've got a pitch block set up with the octave divider with level 2, the sub octave all the way down, and the mix at 50%. I've got a filter block for a solo boost if I ever have to play a solo. And I've got a delay block in there. Again, the Deluxe Mind Guy if I want to have delay. To be honest, I rarely use these. I'll use this sometimes. But the thing that I use all the time is the looper. Super duper handy. That's how it's set up. The dub mix I've turned down a little bit. And over here, I've got a parametric EQ set up and an effects loop if I want to like plug a stomp box into there for gigs where I want to have some kind of percussive thing that I can do with my foot. And the parametric EQ is in there basically just to turn the level of that up or down. Super easy. There you go. I hope you guys got something out of this video and found some cool little tips and tricks. And most importantly, just a reminder, the AX8 still sounds incredible. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. I will see you next time.